Hi everyone, I'm Nicholas. My final project is about how abolitionism and the women's rights movement changed the meaning of freedom in 19th century America. My main point is simple. The United States often phrased liberty and equality, but many people were still left out. Enslaved African Americans did not have freedom, and women had very limited power in public life. Reformers challenged this gap between American ideals and real life. I'll use three primary sources: a speech from Frederick Douglass, a text by Sarah Jimke, and an article from The Liberator. Together, these sources shows that freedom was not a fixed idea. It was something people argued about and tried to expand. The main question of my project is that did American progress really expand freedom, or did it continue racial and gender equality? My answer is that it actually did both. Reformers made the idea of freedom wider, but they still lived inside the limits of their time. First, I will explain the historical context, then I will look at Douglas, Jamke, and the Liberator's article. After that, I'll compare the three sources and explain their larger meaning. Reading them together is important because each source challenged a different boundary. Douglas focused on slavery, Jim Key focused on women's rights, and the Liberators shows that like women talking public action. To understand these sources, we need to look at the period from the 1830s to the 1850s. During this time, the United States often described itself as a country of liberty. At the same time, slavery was still legal and powerful, and women had very few political rights. They could not vote, and the society often expected them to stay in the home instead of speaking in public. In the 1830s, reform movements became more visible. The anti-slavery movement grew, and more people began to organize meetings, give speeches, and publish newspapers. Women also joined this kind of movement. This gave them a new public role, but it also caused debate because many people believe women should not speak or lead in public. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act made the conflict over slavery even stronger. By 1852, when Douglas gave his speech, the gap between the language of liberty and the reality of slavery was impossible to ignore. This is the main background for all three sources. My first source is Frederick Douglass' speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. He gave this speech in Rochester, New York in 1852. Douglas has escaped from slavery, so his point of view was personal as well as, political. His main audience was white Americans, including people who supported reform. The purpose of speech was to expose hypocrisy, which means saying one thing but doing another. Americans celebrate the 4th of July as a symbol of freedom, but enslaved people still deny basic rights. Douglas says, this 4th of July is yours, not mine. This short line created a clear separation. White Americans can celebrate independence, but enslaved people cannot share that kind of celebration. The speech is important because Douglas does more than describe of the cruelty of slavery. He challenged the nation's idea of itself. He asks whether the words um, liberty, equality, and Christianity have any real meaning while slavery continues. For my theme, this source shows that freedom cannot be real if it only belongs to white citizens. Douglas pushed the meaning of freedom toward a universal idea. In other words, freedom should belong to everyone, not only to the group with political power. My second source is Sarah Jimke's Cause for Women's Rights from 1838. Jim Key was a white woman from a slave-holding family in South Carolina. But she became a abolitionist and spoke against slavery. Her experience in the anti-slavery movement also helped her see the limits placed on women. Her purpose was to defend women's equality and their right to take part in reform. Her audience included women, religious leaders, and other people involved in social reform. Jim Key argues that women are not naturally below men. She believes that women have the same moral ability and should be able to speak and act in public. On this slide, the key code says that women should rise and stand on the platform of human rights. This language is important because she connects women's right to the larger idea of human freedom. She's not asking for a small favor. She's saying that women belong in the same discussion about rights and equality. This source also connect the anti-slavery movement and the women's rights movement. Women entered the public reform work because of uh, abolitionism, but once they were there, they faced limits based on gender. Jim Key used that experience to challenge both slavery and women's exclusion. For my thing, she shows that freedom also means having a voice, taking action, and joining public debate. My third source is the 1838 article Rights of Women in Anti-Slavery Meetings, published in the Liberator. This was an um, abolitionist newspaper, so its main audience was people who followed or supported the anti-slavery movement. The article reports that women attended the anti-slavery meetings as delegates and defended their right to participate. This source is different from the first two. Douglas gives a speech, and Jim Case made an argument about the rights. The newspaper article shows those ideas becoming real action. Women are not only talking about public participation, they are entering meetings, joining organizations, and acting as members of a reform movement. The article also shows the importance of print culture. Newspapers help reformers share ideas across different places. They could report events, support activities, and turn local debates into larger public questions. When we compare the three sources, we can see three different boundaries around American freedom. Douglas focused on racial slavery. His main pressure point is national hypocrisy. Um, the country says it supports liberty, but it keeps people enslaved. His freedom claim is that freedom must be universal. And Jim Kids focus on women's equality. Um, her main pressure point is that gender hierarchy or a system that gives men more power than women. Women were expected to support reform quietly, but not lead or speak in public. Her freedom claim is that women need a public voice and a place in language of human rights. And the Liberator article focused on action. A precious point is that public participation. It shows women moving from private support into visible roles as delegates and organizers. Its freedom claim is that reform must become something people can actually do. The shared point is that national ideals were being tested by real experience. People who were excluded from power asked the country to explain why liberty did not include them. Together, the sources show that abolitionism and women's rights were connected. The fight against slavery helped create a space where women could also challenge gender limits. The larger historical meaning is that the progress was not smooth or complete. Before these reform movements, freedom was often imagined mainly through white male citizenship. Abolitionists forced Americans to face the fact that slavery directly went against the nation's claims about liberty. Women reformers then used similar ideas to question why women were excluded from public and political life. However, These movements did not end racial or gender inequality. Slavery continued until the Civil War, and women still could not vote nationally the until much later, actually. Um, Even some reformers carried common ideas from their own time. For example, some people supported women's moral work, but still believed men should hold the most political power. This is why the sources are historically useful. They show both change and limits at the same time. They show that progress did not simply happen because the country became older or larger. People had to fight over the meaning of freedom. They had to give speeches, write articles, attend meetings, and challenge social rules. Progress came through conflict, and each new claim for rights created more questions about who should be included. To conclude, 19th century progress was not only about economic growth, new land, or political expansion. It was it was also a fight over who could claim freedom. Douglas exposed the hypocrisy of celebrating liberty while slavery continued. Jim Key connected women's equality up to the larger idea of human rights. The Liberator article showed women making the claim through real public action. Together, these three sources show that freedom became wider because it included people challenge its limit. At the same time, the change was incomplete. The the racial and gender inequality continued. My final takeaway is that freedom in American history was not simply given from the top. It was changed from below by people who demanded that national ideals match real life. These are the three primary sources I use for the project. Two are inside our course sources, and the last one is the outside source approved in my proposal. And each source gives a different view of freedom, but together they support the same main argument. Okay, that's all. Thank you for listening.